The thunderous roar echoed through the heavens and earth. The deep voice gave no hint of joy or anger, yet when it sounded, countless people were overcome with an instinctive sense of heart-pounding fear. The spiritual pressure of Qin Beixian, though not as overwhelming and surging as that of Lu Baihua, was like the silent, unseen undercurrents of the ocean, extremely terrifying despite its quietude. In the grand hall, fearful gazes turned toward the figure in the sky. The visitor was tall, dressed in a blue robe, his eyes calm yet brimming with contained spiritual energy. Were it not for the suffocating sense of dread emanating from him, anyone might have mistaken him for an ordinary person. But everyone present knew exactly who this seemingly ordinary man was. He was the sect leader of the Northern Profound Sect, and the ruler of the 4 continents, including the 100 Spirits continent. A heavenly supreme at the initial immortal grade, he was immensely famous in the northwest direction of the Great Thousand Worlds. Such a figure could easily be considered a ruler of a region even across the entire Great Thousand Worlds. Father. Seeing the newcomer, the 100 Spirits king once again burst into ecstatic joy, overwhelmed with excitement. Beixian, you must not let this brat off. At this moment, Lu Baihua, who had been stunned by Mu Chen's earlier attempt on her life, finally snapped back to reality and gritted her teeth in anger. She was deeply embarrassed and furious. She had initially thought Mu Chen would be no match for her, but to her surprise, after only exchanging a few moves, she was nearly overwhelmed and almost killed on the spot. Mu Chen's shocking combat power made her heart race with fear, and she wished nothing more than for Qin Beixian to intervene and eliminate Mu Chen right then and there. Meanwhile, the members of the Northern Spirit Alliance, who had been relieved after Mu Chen easily defeated Lu Baihua, now found their hearts racing once again. Their faces turned pale. Though they were far from reaching the realm of a Heavenly Supreme, they understood well the gap between an immortal grade Heavenly Supreme and a spiritual grade Heavenly Supreme. The Northern Profound Sect was a dominant force in the northwest of the Great Thousand Worlds. Without their powerful Heavenly Supreme leader, Qin Beixian, it would have been impossible for them to control the 4 continents. Mu Chen's easy victory over Lu Baihua didn't guarantee he would fare as well against Qin Beixian. Moreover, Qin Beixian had brought along 3 powerful allies to back him up. When all was said and done, the enemy side had 5 Heavenly Supremes in total. With such a terrifying lineup, it was enough to make anyone's scalp tingle in fear. Yet, even as they trembled, Mu Chen remained as calm as a still pond. His gaze was steady as he looked up at Qin Beixian in the sky, and he slowly spoke. You are the sect leader of the Northern Profound Sect, Qin Beixian? Indeed, that is I, Qin Beixian replied with indifference. Do you know the situation here today? Qin Beixian's expression remained unchanged. Clearly, he had already learned everything from the elder who had gone to get reinforcements. Still, he spoke softly, my son may have been in the wrong, but severing his arms was a step too far. Why? Mu Chen asked with a smile, his tone gradually turning cold. If I had come even half a day later, my father might have suffered even worse injuries, and my friend could have been insulted. Do you think your son is more noble than my father and my friends? Despite his smile, his voice was growing increasingly frosty. You are deluded. My son is naturally precious, and thus, he is more noble than all of you. Lu Baihua scoffed, emboldened by Qin Beixian's presence. She spoke without restraint, her words laced with venom. Upon hearing this, a cold glint flashed in Mu Chen's eyes. Chatterbox. Do you really think this thing can protect you? With a sharp motion of his hand, Mu Chen unleashed a devastating strike. The purple flame heavy fist collided fiercely against the azure tortoise shell, causing explosive flashes of fire to burst out. The purple flame surged and once again hammered down on the shell. Boom. The full force of the purple flame heavy fist exploded, its terrifying heat spreading out and melting the ground nearby. The flames wrapped around the azure tortoise shell, causing it to emit a high-pitched screech as it began to melt under the relentless fire. The azure tortoise shell, clearly a peerless sacred artifact of spiritual grade, couldn't withstand the onslaught of the domineering purple flames. Under the intense heat, it began to show signs of melting. Bang! With the shell's defensive power reduced by the flames, the impact of the heavy punch drove through it, slamming Lu Baihua and the tortoise shell into the ground before Qin Beixian could even react. A massive pit appeared in the middle of the city. Willow 100 Blossoms was covered in charred black, her hair completely burned off. On her body, the glow of the azure tortoise shell had weakened considerably. If it hadn't been for this item absorbing most of the force from the violet flame heavy fist earlier, her spirit body would likely have shown signs of breaking from that blow. Even so, she was seriously injured. her face filled with shock and disbelief. It was clear that she couldn't believe that Mu Chen had the audacity to strike at her in front of Qin Beixian. Ah! Willow Hundred Blossoms screamed in fury, her voice filled with venom. Beixian, kill him now. Qin Beixian watched this scene with a dark expression. Mu Chen's action had clearly shown that he didn't take him seriously, and this enraged him. His voice turned cold as he said, "Since you are so reckless, I have no choice but to capture you today." As soon as his words fell, he flicked his sleeve, and the azure tortoise shell protecting Willow Hundred Blossoms shot into the sky. In the next instant, it expanded, and the azure light spread, transforming into a colossal azure tortoise that spanned tens of thousands of meters. The azure tortoise had a menacing face, and as soon as it appeared, it opened its massive mouth and unleashed a torrent of blue water. The flood surged forward, and every drop was as heavy as a mountain, covering Mu Chen. Heh, Brother Beixian, your Northern Abyss tortoise has become even more powerful. Under this Northern Abyss torrent, no one below a mortal grade can resist. One of the Heavenly Supremes standing behind Qin Beixian laughed. The other two nodded slightly, clearly well aware of the power of the blue torrent. During Qin Beixian's rise to power and the founding of the Northern Profound Sect, this Northern Abyss tortoise had helped him defeat many Heavenly Supremes. The young man in front of them, based on his spiritual energy fluctuations, appeared to be only at the mid-spiritual grade. With such strength, he had no chance of contending with Qin Beixian. The Northern Abyss tortoise, huh? Mu Chen raised his head to look at the massive azure tortoise. The Northern Abyss tortoise was indeed a supreme divine beast, and when it matured, it possessed strength comparable to a heavenly supreme. Qin Beixian must have acquired its remains and blood essence, refining it into a spiritual grade peerless sacred artifact. Normally, when an immortal grade heavenly supreme activated a spiritual grade peerless sacred artifact, any spirit grade heavenly supreme would be easily subdued. But unfortunately, Mu Chen was not one of them. It seems there's no reasoning with you and your family. In that case, let's settle this with fists. Mu Chen shook his head, his expression indifferent. He then formed a seal with one hand, and immediately, dazzling spiritual runes appeared all over his body, 9 of them in total. At the same time, a chaotic light rose from behind Mu Chen's head, as if it had no beginning or end, not even space or time, profound beyond measure. Floating pagoda chaos light. Mu Chen silently shouted in his heart, and the chaotic light suddenly swept toward the oncoming blue torrent. Swish. The chaotic light passed through, and the overwhelming blue torrent instantly vanished without a trace. In the chaotic light behind Mu Chen's head, a blue mark appeared. Without stopping, Mu Chen's thought stirred, and the chaotic light rose again, piercing through space and sweeping once more toward the azure tortoise. Swish. The chaotic light surged through the void, and the giant azure tortoise vanished into thin air. In the chaotic light behind Mu Chen's head, a small azure tortoise, no bigger than a palm, appeared. Once something was caught in this chaotic light, it would be suppressed, and as the light washed over it, it would be turned to nothingness. What? This scene caused Qin Beixian's pupils to contract. Behind him, the 3 Heavenly Supremes also changed their expressions dramatically, their faces showing disbelief. They never expected that the Northern Abyss tortoise, which had been invincible in the past, would be so easily overwhelmed by this young man. That kid's backlight. What kind of divine ability is that? How can it be so domineering? One of the Heavenly Supremes exclaimed in shock. In the Grand Hall, the leaders from 100 Spirit Continent were stiff with shock. Clearly, what they were witnessing was beyond their imagination. The high-ranking members of the Northern Spirit Alliance were so stunned they didn't even know how to react. Far in the distance, high in the sky, Qin Beixian's face became solemn. His eyes, filled with caution, glanced at the chaotic light rising behind Mu Chen. He then turned to the 3 men behind him and cupped his hands, saying, "Brothers, it seems this time, I'll need your assistance." At this moment, Qin Beixian no longer dared to regard Mu Chen as an ordinary spiritual grade, heavenly supreme. Such astonishing combat power made even him wary. Therefore, in order to avoid making a fool of himself, he set aside his pride and decided to invite friends for help. Upon hearing Qin Beixian's words, 2 of the 3 spiritual grade Heavenly Supremes hesitated for a moment before nodding. Although Mu Chen's methods were impressive, they still had the advantage in numbers, and if they teamed up, Mu Chen would undoubtedly be defeated. Seeing this, Qin Beixian turned his gaze to the last person. This individual, like him, had reached the initial immortal grade. If he lent a hand, no matter how many tricks Mu Chen had up his sleeve, he would be unable to escape defeat today. However, to his surprise, this immortal grade friend did not agree as readily as usual. Instead, he furrowed his brows, staring at Mu Chen and the chaotic light behind him, as if deep in thought. Brother Lu? Qing Beixian asked, confused. He had a deep friendship with this person, and they had often helped each other in the past. Why was he hesitating when facing a spiritual grade Heavenly Supreme? The immortal grade Heavenly Supreme, referred to as Brother Lu by Qing Beixian, did not respond immediately. He stared at Mu Chen for a long while, and finally, as if struck by a thought, his expression changed dramatically. Ignoring the shocked gazes of Qing Beixian and the others, he cupped his hands and cautiously asked, "May I ask, are you Mu Chen, the Mansion Lord of Mu Manor from Tianluo Continent?" When Brother Lu's somewhat cautious voice echoed, the entire world fell into silence for a moment. Especially Qing Beixian and the other two Heavenly Supremes, who stared at him in disbelief. Brother Lu? You? Qing Beixian's face turned grim. He couldn't understand why the ally they had called for suddenly became so polite to this young Heavenly Supreme. Moreover, in that politeness, there seemed to be an underlying fear. The other two Heavenly Supremes looked at each other in confusion. Inside the Grand Hall, the leaders of many factions from 100 Spirit Continent exchanged glances in stunned silence. Meanwhile, Mu Chen was momentarily taken aback. He glanced at the immortal grade Heavenly Supreme named Lu, then nodded and said, "If you are referring to the Mansion Lord of Mu Manor from Tianluo Continent, then yes, that would be me." Upon hearing Mu Chen's confirmation, Brother Lu, the immortal grade Heavenly Supreme, let out a quiet sigh of relief. His eyes filled with even more caution, and he immediately cupped his hands and smiled. "So it is truly Mu Manor's Mansion Lord. I deeply apologize for my earlier actions." Brother Lu. Qing Beixian spoke again, his voice tense. Brother Lu sighed, looked at Qing Beixian, and said, "Qing brother, since we have known each other for many years, I advise you to reconsider. Today's matter is better left alone." Qing Beixian's face twitched slightly. The other two Heavenly Supremes sensed something was wrong. They glanced at Mu Chen cautiously and asked, "Brother Lu, what exactly is this person's background?" At this moment, even the most oblivious could sense the fear that Brother Lu harbored toward Mu Chen. And if someone of the immortal grade had such fear, then what about them, who were only at the spiritual grade? Brother Lu forced a smile and said, "The distance from here to Pagoda Continent is vast, so you may not know this, but not long ago, this Mu Manor Lord single-handedly infiltrated the Futu ancient clan. With only his strength, he nearly wiped out all the elders of the Futu clan. It was only when the Futu clan's grand elder, Futu Xian, intervened that he was stopped." Hearing this, even Qing Beixian's expression changed. He was well aware of the Futu clan's position in the Great Thousand Worlds, one of the 5 ancient clans, with a profound and immeasurable foundation. Compared to his own North Profound Sect, which was considered a top-tier power, the Futu clan was on a whole different level. The Grand Elder of the Futu clan, a Saint-grade Heavenly Supreme, stood at the pinnacle of the Great Thousand Worlds. For Mu Chen to have forced Futu Xian to intervene, it was unimaginable how terrifying Mu Chen must be. But how could that be? He is only a spiritual grade Heavenly Supreme. The other two Heavenly Supremes exclaimed in disbelief. The Futu clan had countless immortal grade Heavenly Supremes, and even with sheer numbers, they could easily overwhelm Mu Chen. Because at the time, he controlled the Futu clan's clan protection array, using its power to suppress all the elders of the Futu clan. Even the branch leaders of the Profound Lineage and Ink Lineage, who were both at the late immortal grade, were no match for him, Brother Lu explained. The two Heavenly Supremes exchanged glances, both secretly clicking their tongues. Wasn't Mu Chen a little too reckless? To pull off something so terrifying, what kind of grudge had he caused with the Futu ancient clan? Qing Beixian's expression grew serious, though he couldn't help but feel a slight sense of relief. It turned out that Mu Chen was relying on the Futu ancient clan's clan protection array. That overwhelming power didn't come from him directly. He's certainly proven his abilities by pulling off such feats. But is it really enough to make Brother Lu so wary? He's offended the Futu ancient clan, yet still behaves so recklessly? Qing Beixian spoke in a low voice. Mu Chen's accomplishments were indeed astonishing, even to him, but to make a Heavenly Supreme from the immortal grade so afraid? That seemed a bit excessive. The Heavenly Supreme with the surname Lu shook his head. Don't be fooled by his rank as a spiritual grade Heavenly Supreme. Even an elder from the Futu ancient clan at the immortal grade's early stage was defeated by him. That's not the power of the clan protection array, it's his own strength. Moreover, have you ever wondered why, After Mu Chen stirred up such chaos in the Futu ancient clan, he's still completely unscathed? Upon hearing this, Qin Xian and the other two heavenly supremes felt a chill run down their spines. The Futu ancient clan was an incredibly strict and ancient family that cared greatly about its reputation. Mu Chen had completely tarnished their face, and under normal circumstances, they would never let him off. Yet Mu Chen was still alive and well. What did that mean? It meant that even after doing all those things, the Futu ancient clan still couldn't do anything to him. How much power did that take? Mu Chen has deep ties with the Flame Emperor of the Boundless Fire Domain and the martial ancestor of the Martial Realm. He stirred up the Futu ancient clan, and both the Flame Emperor and martial ancestor even offered him protection. The Heavenly Supreme with the surname Lu continued. The faces of Qin Xian and the other two changed once again. The Flame Emperor, the martial ancestor, those were names that resonated throughout the Great Thousand Worlds. They stood at the pinnacle, even among the immortal grade Heavenly Supremes. And Mu Chen, who had such deep connections with them. He had even offended the Futu ancient clan for their sake? No wonder. The two Heavenly Supremes sighed. With those two backing him, even the Futu ancient clan would have to think twice. Lu smiled. But that's not even the most important part. Do you know why Mu Chen caused such an uproar in the Futu ancient clan? It was to rescue his mother. Many years ago, his mother had an affair with his father on the 100 Spirit continent, which angered the Futu ancient clan. They later imprisoned her, and Mu Chen went there to rescue her. And his mother is no ordinary woman. The moment she revealed herself, she stripped the position of the Futu clan's Grand Elder from Futu Xian, and she herself is a Saint-grade Grandmaster. So now, the Grand Elder of the Futu ancient clan is none other than Mu Chen's mother. Qin Xian and the two Heavenly Supremes were left speechless, their eyes wide in shock. So it turns out that Mu Chen's mother was now the new Grand Elder of the Futu ancient clan? No wonder the Futu ancient clan wasn't holding Mu Chen accountable for his actions. The highest power had shifted to his mother's hands. The two Heavenly Supremes exchanged looks, both at a loss for words. Their gazes flickered, clearly now hesitant, for they had finally realized how vast the web of connections surrounding Mu Chen truly was. Not only did he have the support of the Boundless Fire Domain and the Martial Realm, but now he was backed by the Futu ancient clan as well. These were some of the top superpowers in the Great Thousand Worlds. A single step from them could shake the world. While they too were Heavenly Supremes, enjoying the worship of billions, they understood all too well the gap between themselves and those top-tier forces and the Saint-grade beings. With this kind of background, there were very few forces in the Great Thousand Worlds that could make Mu Chen wary. Qin Xian's face turned slightly pale. He had originally thought Mu Chen was just an ordinary spiritual grade Heavenly Supreme, but now he realized the depth of his background, so deep, in fact, that even he felt a bit fearful. Now, he truly found himself in a difficult position, caught between a rock and a hard place. While Qin Xian hesitated, he suddenly noticed that the expression of the Heavenly Supreme with the surname Lu had changed. He couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong now?" Lu's eyes flickered as he scanned the Grand Hall. Then, his gaze landed on a gentle figure sitting beside Mu Feng. His scalp tingled, and he murmured, "Do you see that woman? She looks a lot like Mu Chen's mother, doesn't she?" At his words, even Qin Xian felt his scalp go numb, while the other two Heavenly Supremes looked alarmed. They carefully shifted their gazes toward the woman who had been quietly sitting there, letting Mu Chen speak his mind. As they focused, they began to feel a silent pressure emanating from her. That's it. That's it. The Tian Supreme with the Lu surname finally recognized her, revealing a smile that was even uglier than crying. That's Mu Chen's mother, the current Grand Elder of the Futu ancient clan, Qing Yanjing. The other two Tian Supremes felt a chill run through their bodies. They had actually considered working together to deal with her son in front of a Saint-grade Grandmaster? They couldn't imagine what the outcome would have been if they had acted earlier. They immediately turned to Qin Xian, saying, "Brother Qin, today, we almost got ourselves into real trouble because of you." Their words carried some resentment. While they had agreed to help Qin Xian, he hadn't even clarified the situation and had dragged them in. It felt like he was setting them up. Qin Xian's face turned pale, alternating between blue and white. After a bitter smile, he said, "This was my mistake. I never expected this rebellious son would cause such trouble. We should retreat for now, meet this lady, and see if we can smooth things over," Qin Xian added. He also thought about personally investigating next time to confirm whether the woman truly was the Grand Elder of the Futu ancient clan. The three Tian Supremes nodded in agreement. Thus, under the shocked gazes of the various leaders in the hall, the 4 Tian Supremes, who had previously been full of arrogance and intent on dealing with Mu Chen, descended from the sky and landed in the broken hall. Father! Father! The 100 Spirits King saw Qin Qian'er arrive and was overjoyed, calling out hurriedly. However, Qin Qian'er ignored his call completely. He walked directly to the Northern Spirit Alliance's seating area, and, in the midst of astonished gazes, he bowed in respect to Qing Yanjing, who was standing next to Mu Feng. May I ask, is this the Grand Elder of the Futu Ancient Clan? Qin Beishuan's hesitant voice echoed through the hall. The 100 Spirits King, who had been so overjoyed just moments ago, suddenly froze, his face full of disbelief as he stared at this scene. The other leaders, too, were left in utter astonishment. The senior officials from the Northern Spirit Alliance, who had been chatting casually with Qing Yanjing earlier, were now completely stunned. They swallowed nervously, all of them turning to look at Qing Yanjing standing next to Mu Feng. Clearly, they couldn't understand why these 4 high-ranking Tian Supremes were suddenly showing such great respect to Qing Yanjing. Qing Yanjing herself was slightly surprised by their respectful attitude, but after a moment's hesitation, she smiled faintly and nodded her head. I am Qing Yanjing. Upon hearing this, Qin Qian'er felt as if he had been plunged into an icy cave, his entire body chilled to the bone. They, the blind fools, had been acting like monkeys in front of a Saint-grade Grandmaster. The hall fell silent. Qin Qian'er and the others were drenched in cold sweat, their faces pale. It was clear they felt genuine fear. A Saint-grade Grandmaster could, with a mere thought, trap them in a spirit formation world and erase them from existence. The difference between Saint-grade and immortal grade was that vast. It was like the difference between the emperor of a small country and the emperor of a superpower. Both are emperors, but with a single thought, the latter could bring the former's nation to ruin. Grand Elder of the Futu Ancient Clan? The other leaders in the hall, as well as the senior officials from the Northern Spirit Alliance, were all looking at Qing Yanjing with confusion. Given their status, they rarely encountered ancient powers of the Futu Ancient Clan's level. To them, even a superpower with a Tian Supreme standing at the helm seemed far beyond reach. A top-tier ancient clan in such a superpower? It wasn't even on their radar. However, seeing the trembling appearance of Qin Qian'er and the others, they could sense the terror behind it. Even when Mu Chen had previously displayed his incredible fighting strength, it had only made the 4 Tian Supremes wary, not fearful. Clearly, the intimidation from Qing Yanjing was far greater than Mu Chen's. Gulp. Many of the leaders couldn't help but swallow nervously, their gazes toward Qing Yanjing filled with awe. It was only at this moment that they understood. The most terrifying presence in this hall was not Mu Chen, who wielded overwhelming power, but this gentle and approachable woman, who seemed so ordinary yet exuded a quiet, powerful aura. In contrast to Mu Chen's fierce gaze, Qing Yanjing was like a bodhisattva who commanded respect without even raising her voice. The Northern Spirit Alliance officials, who had been chatting so casually with Qing Yanjing earlier, were now wiping the cold sweat off their brows. Thinking back, they had been laughing and talking with someone they couldn't even begin to reach in terms of power. The thought made their hearts race. Hiki, it seems my wife is more capable than my son after all. The only 2 people who were still somewhat composed were Mu Feng, who, seeing the scene, smiled at Mu Chen and said this with a grin. Upon hearing this, Mu Chen could only helplessly roll his eyes. Father. At the head of the hall, 100 Spirits King, seeing this, was struck as though by a thunderbolt. His face immediately twisted with fury, and he hissed, Father, you must avenge me. You can't let them off. He never expected that the long-awaited reinforcements not only failed to make Mu Chen's family kneel before him as he had hoped, but were instead bowing to the other side. This contrast was so shocking that it nearly drove the usually smooth-sailing 100 Spirits King to the brink of madness. Shut up, ungrateful son. Qin Beishuan's face turned pale with rage. He waved his sleeve, and with a flick of his hand, slapped 100 Spirits King across the face with a force that sent him crashing into the wall. His icy gaze locked onto the latter, and through gritted teeth, he said, Do you still think you haven't caused enough trouble? At that moment, Qin Qian'er also felt a chill of fear. If it weren't for his friend discovering things early today, if things had escalated and angered Qing Yanjing, under the wrath of a Saint-grade expert, even the entire Northern Profound Sect would have been wiped out. As an immortal-grade Heavenly Supreme, he understood the terrifying power of a Saint-grade Grandmaster, and he knew exactly the kind of power that the Futu Ancient Clan held. And just thinking about how close the entire sect came to facing an extermination disaster because of 100 Spirits King's actions, Qin Beishuan's heart was filled with both fear and fury. 100 Spirits King's face swelled, and he stared in a daze at Qin Beishian. The intense pain from his swollen face finally snapped him back to reality, sending a cold shiver down his spine. At this point, how could he not see that it wasn't that his father didn't want to avenge him, but rather that the enemies he had provoked were so powerful that even his father was terrified. The young man and the gentle woman before him were beings they could never afford to offend. With his support shattered and the last remnants of his confidence evaporating, 100 Spirits King shivered uncontrollably as he looked into Mu Chen's cold eyes, and fear surged in his heart. Beishian, what are you doing? At this moment, Lu Baiwa rushed into the hall. Seeing her son's swollen face from Qin Beishuan's slap, she was immediately furious. This son was her most cherished. Shut your mouth. However, as soon as she spoke, Qin Beishuan's cold, harsh gaze turned toward her. If you don't want to see both the Northern Profound Sect and the 100 Flowers Sect struck off the list, then wake up. Lu Baiwa shuddered, fear flickering in her eyes as she glanced at Qing Yanjing. At this distance, she could already feel the terrifying, invisible pressure emanating from the latter. Under such overwhelming suppression, no matter how heartbroken or unwilling she was, she dared not speak again. Inside the hall, the other leaders could not help but secretly sigh. It seemed that 100 Spirits King was completely doomed this time. But who could have imagined that the mere leader of the Northern Spirit Alliance would have such a terrifying background? His wife was the first elder of the Futu ancient clan, and his son was a heavenly supreme who could overpower even Qin Beishian. This was enough to drive them to the edge of collapse because Mu Feng's strength had clearly not yet reached the supreme stage. After subduing his wife and son, Qin Beishian turned and gave a respectful salute to Qing Yanjing, bitterly saying, "Today's events are entirely my son's own doing. Sir, may I ask what your plans are for him?" Qing Yanjing furrowed her brow slightly, showing no interest in the matter. She shook her head and replied, "These things are for my son to decide. You should ask him." Mu Chen glanced at Qin Beishian and spoke calmly, "Qin Sect Master, this 100 Spirits King has been protected by you, and in the 100 Spirit Continent, he has lorded over others, oppressing them while they could only suffer in silence. However, today, he has crossed the line with my family, and now, it's your turn to face the consequences." Qin Beishian forced a bitter smile and nodded. It was indeed fair when 100 Spirits King oppressed others, they could suppress him, and everything was fine. But now, he had provoked someone he shouldn't have, and naturally, he would have to pay the price. Leave it to Mu Manor's lord to decide. He spoke decisively, since he knew he could not resist and chose to submit. "You are a wise man," Mu Chen said with a smile. Qin Beishian could bend and yield, truly fitting the role of a sect master. From now on, the 100 Spirit Continent will no longer be under the jurisdiction of your Northern Profound Sect. It will be ruled by the Northern Spirit Alliance. As soon as these words were spoken, a faint murmur of astonishment spread throughout the Grand Hall. The leaders of the various forces on the 100 Spirit Continent were shaken to their core. If things proceeded this way, the king they would worship in the future would surely become Mu Feng, wouldn't it? This made some of the leaders uneasy. After all, the Northern Spirit Alliance had been considered only a mid-tier force on the 100 Spirit Continent, but now it was directly towering above them. However, their unease turned to dread when Mu Chen's gaze swept over them. A chill ran down their spines, and they cursed themselves inwardly. With such a powerful wife and son, who would dare still view the Northern Spirit Alliance as a negligible force? Hearing this, Qin Beishian hesitated for a moment before gritting his teeth and nodding. "All right, the 100 Spirit Continent will be offered to the Northern Profound Sect in full, to appease both of your anger." Although losing the 100 Spirit Continent was a significant blow to their sect, it was still within the range of what they could bear. "Also, your son harmed my family in a despicable manner. He should have been wiped out without hesitation, but for your sake, I'll spare his life," Mu Chen said coldly. Just as Qin Beishian breathed a sigh of relief, Mu Chen's voice rang out once more. "However, while his death may be avoided, his punishment cannot." As his words fell, an ancient, crystalline floating pagoda shot up from the top of Mu Chen's head, soaring into the sky before it hovered directly above the horrified 100 Spirits King. The crystalline light from the pagoda poured down, rapidly forming crystal-like runes on the 100 Spirits King's body. These runes were like chains, piercing into his flesh and blood. As these crystal runes formed, the 100 Spirits King's shock grew as he felt his spiritual power rapidly fade, growing dimmer until it vanished completely. Seal his spiritual power for 50 years. Mu Chen's cold voice echoed through the hall, and the 100 Spirits King was struck like a bolt of lightning, his face paling to the color of ash. You. Lu Baiwa gritted her teeth in anger, her eyes filled with hatred. And you. At that moment, Mu Chen's icy gaze turned toward her, and he coldly said, anyone who insults my family will not go unpunished. Mu Chen was furious with this vulgar woman, for it was her actions that had allowed the 100 Spirits King to act recklessly. She had even previously insulted his father with venomous words. Such a woman could not be easily forgiven. Whoosh. As his words fell, the crystalline pagoda once again pierced through the air, appearing above Lu Baiwa's head. The crystal light descended, enveloping her entirely. Lu Baiwa's face showed terror as she hastily tried to use her spiritual power to resist. However, as soon as her spiritual power made contact with the crystal light, it was swiftly shattered, collapsing at an incredible speed. In just a few short breaths, crystal runes were imprinted all over her body. Lu Baiwa's once vast and overwhelming spiritual power quickly withered away. With Mu Chen's current strength, he couldn't completely seal a heavenly supreme spiritual power, but he could still weaken it. At this moment, Lu Baiwa's power was equivalent to that of an upper earth supreme. This seal will last for 20 years, and after that, it will dissipate, Mu Chen stated coldly. Lu Baiwa's face turned pale as she realized the full extent of the blow. As a heavenly supreme, to suddenly be reduced to an earth supreme was an overwhelming blow for her. The entire hall fell silent. Everyone was stunned by Mu Chen's ruthless methods. With a mere flick of his hand, he had sealed both the 100 Spirits King and Lu Baiwa. The sheer power of it was beyond words. Having done this, Mu Chen turned to Qin Beixian and spoke slowly. Sect Master Qin, do you have any objections to my actions? Qin Beixian's face was bitter as he shook his head. He knew that Mu Chen had already shown leniency. In the Great Thousand Worlds, the power of a saint-grade expert could destroy the heavens and the earth. If a saint truly became enraged, both the Northern Profound Sect and the 100 Flowers Sect would surely face annihilation. At this point, having only sealed the 100 Spirits King and Lu Baihua's spiritual powers was far more merciful than the complete destruction of their sections. In that case, this matter is settled. I hope you will act wisely in the future. If any problems arise with the Northern Spirit Alliance, I will personally pay a visit, Mu Chen said calmly. He couldn't remain on the 100 Spirit continent forever, and if he and Qing Yanjing were to leave, Qin Beixian would surely be powerless to take revenge, given the strength of the Northern Spirit Alliance. Qin Beixian understood the meaning behind Mu Chen's words. He forced a bitter smile and nodded. After witnessing the power of Mu Chen and Qing Yanjing, he no longer harbored any thoughts of revenge. Then we shall take our leave for now. Qin Beixian waved his sleeve, and spiritual energy swept up the 100 Spirits King and Willow 100 Blossoms, sending them toward Mu Chen. Qing Yanjing clasped her fists in greeting before not lingering any longer. Along with the other 3 heavenly supremes, they transformed into beams of spiritual light and shot into the sky. As Qin Beixian and the others departed, the overwhelming sense of pressure that had shrouded the land also dissipated. However, the leaders of various factions in the Grand Hall, looking at the wreckage around them, all knew in their hearts that from now on, the 100 Spirit continent would undergo a dramatic change. It seemed they needed to quickly prepare lavish gifts and head to the Northern Spirit Alliance to pay their respects. The affairs of 100 Spirit City came to an unexpectedly swift end. After the leaders of all factions left, the 100 Spirit continent inevitably trembled with shock. Everyone was stunned by the outcome. Who could have imagined that, after a single king worship ceremony, the 100 Spirit continent would change hands? Moreover, the new ruler of the continent was none other than the previously unheard of Northern Spirit Alliance. It's important to note that the Northern Spirit Alliance had been a mere mid-sized faction in the 100 Spirit continent before, barely noteworthy. Yet this time, it soared to unimaginable heights. Although many factions were envious of the Northern Spirit Alliance's rapid rise, they all understood why this happened. The Alliance's leader, Mu Feng, had a terrifyingly powerful background. Although his own strength wasn't remarkable, his wife and son were formidable beyond measure. Rumor had it that his wife, Qing Yanjing, was the first elder of the Futu ancient clan, a faction ranked among the top in the Great Thousand Worlds. As for his son, Chen, he started from nothing and within just 10 years, reached the heavenly supreme rank. He even carved out a place for himself in the supercontinent Tianluo and established Mu Manor, joining the ranks of the great thousand world's most powerful forces. Such a background was even more formidable than the 100 Spirits Kings. No wonder even Qin Yanjing, the sect master of the Northern Profound Sect, had to concede defeat and hand over the 100 Spirit Continent. With these two towering figures supporting the Northern Spirit Alliance, the other factions in the 100 Spirit Continent didn't dare to make any rash moves. Some of the more astute factions even sent emissaries early on to the Northern Spirit Alliance, hoping to leave a good impression on the new rulers of the continent. Northern Spirit Alliance Headquarters, Northern Spirit Realm, 100 Spirit Continent. The current headquarters of the Northern Spirit Alliance was once the main city of Mu Domain, where Chen had grown up. In a quiet courtyard of the Mu Manor, Chen lay in a stone pavilion, gazing at the familiar surroundings that seemed etched deep in his memory. A smile appeared on his lips as he relaxed his body completely, a sense of ease spreading through his limbs. Ever since he left the Northern Spirit Realm years ago, Chen had been like a taut bowstring, constantly pushing forward. No matter the hardships or dangers, he faced them with unyielding courage. Back then, he knew he was weak. He couldn't even reach the level of the Luo God clan, where Luo Li resided, let alone the Futu ancient clan. So, he had no choice but to keep moving forward. Over the years, his hard work had paid off. Now, he had fulfilled the promise he made to his father when leaving the Northern Spirit Realm. Though the journey was tough, he had succeeded in the end. Dad, I did it. Chen smiled faintly, gazing at the blue sky, a gentle joy filling his heart. But at this moment, he couldn't help but think how wonderful it would be if Luo Li were by his side. As soon as he thought of the girl, his smile grew even warmer. He knew that Luo Li's decision to join the Futu ancient clan as the Holy Maiden wasn't just to help him. There was also a part of her pride at play. In Chen's eyes, although Luo Li had stunning beauty, she possessed an intense pride in her heart, one that wasn't inferior to anyone else's. It was like that time in the Spirit Road when she chased him for days and nights, all because of a single obsession. Now that Chen had reached the heavenly supreme rank, he imagined that Luo Li must have felt some pressure. She wasn't the kind of girl who liked to hide behind him, letting him shield her from the storms of the world. What she wanted was to have enough strength to stand by his side and face the storms together. Hey, snap out of it. Just as Chen was lost in thought, a small white hand waved in front of him, accompanied by a clear voice in his ear. Chen snapped back to reality and looked at Tang Qian'er, who had appeared before him. He smiled and said, "Qian'er, what brings you here?" Tang Qian'er smiled as she sat beside him, her slender legs stretching out to reveal a breathtaking length. She placed her jade-like hand in front of her, gazing at the familiar surroundings with a nostalgic look. This place really brings back memories. The two of them had grown up together, so Mu Manor was no stranger to Tang Qian'er. Chen also nodded with a sigh, then smiled and asked, "So, you're staying at the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy now?" Tang Qian'er nodded slightly, saying, "I think the academy suits me well. Although it's not as glamorous as where you are now, it's still quite interesting to see the young ones growing up just like we did back then." Chen smiled warmly and said, "You're looking a little too mature now. You're still in your prime." Compared to her younger self, Tang Qian'er had become more mature. Serving as the vice dean of the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy gave her a unique aura, which was likely why the 100 Spirits King, a man accustomed to beauty, had started showing interest in her. What's the use of that? Tang Qian'er sighed inwardly, then playfully glanced at Chen and smiled. What about Luo Li? How is she? Why didn't you bring her back to meet Uncle Mu and the others? She's doing well. She went to the Supreme Spirit Ancient Clan to become a Holy Maiden. Maybe next time I can bring her back. Chen stretched lazily and replied. Seeing the hint of complaint in Chen's voice, but noticing the smile at the corner of his lips, Tang Qian'er lowered her gaze. A hint of sadness flashed through her eyes, but it quickly faded as she teased, "I thought you didn't win her over. She's so outstanding. How could she be interested in you?" Chen shook his head helplessly. "I'm not that bad, am I? You're a young heavenly supreme. That's already pretty impressive," Tang Qian'er chuckled, covering her mouth. "When I return to the academy, I'll have to mention this to the dean and the others. They all remember you because you stole the spotlight during that 5 Academies war." Chen shook his head, thinking back on those days, youthful and reckless. I'll wait a few more days, and then I'll head back to the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy. Who knows when I'll come back next time, Tang Qian'er said, curling her long legs and gazing up at the sky, a hint of melancholy in her eyes. Don't worry, if I get the chance, I'll visit you at the academy, Chen comforted her. After thinking for a moment, he took out a jade token, its surface glowing with spiritual light. Keep this on you. If you're ever in danger, crush it, and I'll come to help you as fast as I can. Tang Qian'er stared at the jade token, then reached out to take it. It was slightly cool to the touch, but gave her a sense of warmth. She carefully put it on a red string, tied it, and tucked it close to her chest. At least you've got a little conscience, she smiled sweetly, her expression radiant. Before I leave, let's find some time to go together. Sure. Tang Qian'er waved at Chen and gracefully jumped off the stone pavilion, her figure vanishing into the distance. Chen watched her disappear, a gentle smile on his face, though his heart couldn't help but long for that girl who always occupied his thoughts. This little girl's actually not bad. Why don't you consider her as my daughter-in-law? Suddenly, a teasing voice came from behind. Chen quickly turned around and saw Qing Yanjing standing beside him, not sure when she had arrived. Chen's face flushed slightly, and he could only shake his head helplessly. Qing Yanjing chuckled and ruffled Chen's hair. If not, then hurry up and bring Luoli home. I met her last time, and she's really a great girl. Qing Yanjing had seen Luoli during her appearance in the northern Song continent, so she had a deep impression of her. Chen could only smile wryly and nod. By the way, Mom, can you set up an ultra-long-distance teleportation spirit array in Biling City? Ideally, it should link directly to the Mu Manor headquarters on Tianluo continent. Chen suddenly asked, remembering something. He knew that he wouldn't be staying in the northern spirit realm for long, but he was worried about his father, so setting up a long-distance array was the best option. This way, he could visit the 100 Spirit continent whenever necessary. However, this was no easy task. The distance between the 100 Spirit continent and Tianluo continent was immense, and even Chen couldn't build such an array himself, so he had to rely on Qing Yanjing, a teleportation array to Tianluo continent. Qing Yanjing thought for a moment, then nodded. An array of that distance would probably require a Saint-grade Grandmaster to complete. Chen's face lit up with joy. However, this kind of teleportation array would need a secondary array on Tianluo continent to provide spatial coordinates. Otherwise, there's nothing I can do. Chen wasn't surprised and smiled. Don't forget, Mom, I'm also a Spirit Array Grandmaster. I'm not unaware of the basics. I set up the secondary array before I left the Mu Manor. As he spoke, a flash of light flickered in his hand, and a silver crystal stone appeared. Intense spatial ripples pulsed from its surface. This is a space stone, he explained. It's an essential component for constructing a teleportation spirit array. The one in my hand is the main stone. Its counterpart has already been embedded in the array at the Mu Mansion headquarters. Qing Yanjing took the space stone with a gentle smile. In that case, I should be able to finish constructing the array within half a month. Once it's complete, you'll no longer need to travel across continents. You'll be able to go back and forth freely. Chen grinned and raised his hand high. Mom, you're amazing.